Greetings, I'm Elder Goodson. I'm a recently retired international airline captain, now serving as an emergency communications specialist for the North America Southeast area. Today I'd like to talk a little bit about radio and how it might help you in your backup communications plan for your stake. If there's no internet or cell service, radio could be a useful tool in diminishing the distance between church leaders and members. Now, radio waves travel one of three ways. First of all is a ground wave. That's what an AM radio station uses. That's low frequency, hugs the earth for about 100 miles. Pretty impractical for our purposes. The second way is by what we call a sky wave. Those are short waves, shortwave radio, where the transmission goes up and bounces off the upper atmosphere in the earth and skips around the planet. That's how we conduct long distance communications. The kind I'd like to talk about today are line of sight. Those are conducted primarily on the VHF or UHF, that's very high frequency or ultra high frequency bands. These are line of sight communication paths, and that's one of the reasons why TV stations and FM radio stations and even business band and ham radio and such are mounted on high towers to maximize that distance. Now, they're great up to several miles depending on your terrain, but there are different radio services that operate in these bands, and that's what I'd like to talk about today. The first one you're probably already familiar with, called the Family Radio Service. If you've ever had these bubble pack radios and taken them on campouts or with your family to an amusement park, they're great for communications in, say, a neighborhood watch group. Low powered, very easy to use. They have a certain number of channels. The big brother to that is called the General Mobile Radio Service, or GMRS, where you're allowed more power and a detachable antenna, which will greatly increase the range. This requires sending in a licensing fee, I think $30, $35, something like that. It covers your whole family for 10 years. And that's sometimes very useful for communicating between wards or areas of a ward to bishopric and so on and so forth. Now, these bubble pack radios have these outlandish claims, 25, 50-mile range. It's ridiculous. I mean, if you're on a mountaintop and I'm on a mountaintop, we've got a lake between us, yeah, maybe that'll work. But generally, I find in an urban setting, at least, maybe up to a mile. They're really good, by the way, at getting into these metal high-rise buildings. So for neighborhood watch groups, or if you were to divide wards into blocks, for emergency communications purposes, and each block had like a block captain, and that way he could, check on his people and return and report to the bishopric. Yeah, it's a useful system. Now, to expand the range, what some people do is they put up what's called a repeater radio, and what happens there is you put a radio on a high vantage point, like on a hilltop, mountain, or tall building. It receives your signal and then simultaneously retransmits it over a larger area. So if you can hit that repeater, you greatly increase the range and effectiveness of your signal. Now, you have to think, okay, what's the power of that system? Does it have backup or emergency power? So you have to investigate these things. And that brings up another topic, why it's a good idea to have a stake emergency communication specialist, somebody who'll do the legwork and find out what resources already exist in your area and what radio service would best cover your stake. So that's FRS and GMRS. An example of a GMRS radio would be this Midland from their Micro Mobile series. This is a 15-watt radio, and notice for all radios you need a power source. Since most communications outages are caused by lack of power, we don't want to rely on commercial power, so we'd have like a battery and a charger that would power it. And then the radio itself, then we need a feed line to go from the radio to the antenna. A typical antenna might be one that we would use mobile or at home. Here's a really good mobile antenna that fits on your rooftop via magnetic mount. And you can I've also used these like at stake buildings where I'll put it on top of an air conditioning duct in the attic or on top of a file cabinet. So you just try different things and see what works the best. So that's how, or a typical example of a GMRS radio, and that's certified to using that band. Recently, the Chinese have been making some radios that'll cover all sorts of things. They'll cover the GMRS band and amateur radio and business radio. Typical example of that is this Anytone, Anytone, ATUV778, I think is this one. This is only like $130 and does all sorts of things. Now, it's kind of a gray area because by the letter of the law, I'm not sure if this thing is actually what I think they call type certified for the GMRS band. It's capable of doing it if it's programmed correctly, but you might have to check and see it. It might not be technically legal to use on the GMRS band, but it sure works well on amateur radio. And if even if you didn't transmit on the other bands, you can still listen in on them legally. So that's another option. Now, sooner or later, as distances increase, the qualifications of the operator and the equipment increase also as you try to go with longer distances. So sooner or later, you end up in the arena of amateur or ham radio. Amateur operators are an interesting group. They're more preparedness oriented than most people in general. They're into solar power and other types of backup power, and they're given a variety of frequencies to use and a variety of equipment. You can even send email via radio. It's pretty impressive. So in your area, I'm sure there are local amateur ham radio clubs. A lot of them have relationships with nonprofit organizations and civic organizations, say county government, where you can become credentialed and actually work behind the lines in supporting emergency communications, which can be a benefit to the church also. So it can be like a symbiotic relationship. So your emergency communication specialist can investigate all these things and find out what resources are in place, what method, if like a GMRS system might work good between the units in your stake or between your stake leaders and your bishops, or if you need to go to amateur radio, which is certainly a worthwhile enterprise. Just depends on the lay of the land, your terrain, and the people that you're working with. So hopefully those are a few ideas. And now for going up to your welfare self-reliance manager in your Area 70, you might need that shortwave capability with amateur radio. So a few things to consider. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me. I'm at dangoodson@mac.com. That's DANGOODSON @MAC.com. Thank you.